I stood in the middle of the small room, my hands shaking as I held a piece of paper. The words on it were blurry because of the tears in my eyes. It was my English test result, and once again I had failed. My teacher had looked at me with pity that morning, and some of my classmates had whispered and laughed. I felt small, broken, and useless. That evening, when I returned home, my mother noticed my silence. She didn't say much. She just placed a plate of food in front of me and sat beside me. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I cried, telling her how I felt like I wasn't good enough and how learning English was impossible for me. My mother didn't hug me right away. She simply held my hand and said, "Promise me one thing. Never stop trying. One day, this struggle will make you stronger." Her words stayed with me like a burning flame in my heart. I promised her that night, and though I didn't know how, I decided I would master English, not for the world, but for myself and for my mother's belief in me. The journey began with tiny steps. I started waking up an hour earlier every day. That hour was my time to sit with a small notebook and try to read the simplest English sentences. At first, I couldn't even pronounce many words. I remember one night crying again because I couldn't understand what a simple story meant. My father saw me struggling and said, "Even a mountain can be moved, but only with one small stone at a time. Keep moving your stones." My family wasn't wealthy. We didn't have money for fancy English classes, tutors, or new books. But they gave me something even more valuable, their faith in me. My younger sister, who loved drawing, made flashcards for me with pictures of objects and their English names. My grandmother, who didn't know English herself, would sit with me and listen as I read out loud, correcting me even when she didn't know if it was right. One day, I discovered something that changed everything: English movies. I remember the first one I watched. It was hard and I didn't understand much, but I kept watching, pausing, and writing down words I heard. Slowly, the magic began to happen. I started recognizing words in books and even in songs. I would sing English songs loudly, even if my pronunciation wasn't perfect. Practice makes progress. I would tell myself, repeating my mother's wisdom. The biggest turning point came when I stood up to give a speech in my school. It was a contest, and though my English wasn't perfect, I had prepared for weeks. I practiced in front of a mirror, recording myself and listening for mistakes. I even asked my classmates to correct me. When I finally spoke on stage, my voice trembled, but I saw my family in the audience, clapping for me even before I finished. When I won third place, I realized something important. English wasn't just about grammar or big words. It was about connecting, expressing, and believing in yourself. That day, I started loving the language. There were many sleepless nights when I doubted myself. Many times I felt like quitting. But whenever I looked at my mother's face, I remembered my promise. I worked harder. I would write down new words every day and challenge myself to use them in sentences. I would talk to myself in English while walking to school. It didn't matter if people thought I was weird. I was determined to keep my promise. There's one fact I learned during this journey. English isn't difficult. What's difficult is believing in yourself when the world tells you you're not good enough. And I learned that with love, hard work, and family support, you can break any barrier. Today, when I speak English confidently, people often ask me, "How did you do it? What's your secret?" I smile and tell them, the secret is simple. Keep trying, even when it feels impossible. I tell them about my mother's promise and how every step of the journey was a lesson in patience and faith. As I end my story, let me leave you with one thought. Every expert was once a beginner. Every dream begins with a small step. If I, someone who once cried over failed tests, can master English, so can you. Remember, the struggle is the most beautiful part of the journey because it shapes who you become. If my story inspired you even a little, make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Together, we'll take more steps toward learning and growing every single day. Thank you for believing in yourself. Thank you for listening to me.